The old cargo hauler Lucky Strike had seen better days, but Rose Miller couldn't afford anything newer. She guided her ship through the asteroid field with practiced ease, her weathered hands steady on the controls despite the coffee stains on her jumpsuit and the exhaustion weighing down her shoulders. Behind her, the ship creaked and groaned like an old house in a storm. Another day, another credit, she muttered to herself, scanning the debris field ahead. This particular stretch of space had once been home to a research facility, though nobody seemed to know exactly what kind. The records were classified, sealed away in some government vault where secrets went to die. All Rose knew was that something had blown up here 3 months ago and blown up good. The Lucky Strike wasn't much to look at. Paint peeling from her hull, engines that coughed more than they should, and a life support system that made strange whistling noises at night. But she was home to Rose and her 16-year-old daughter Lily, and more importantly, she was paid for. In a galaxy where debt could get you shipped off to a labor colony, owning your own ship was freedom. Lily poked her head into the cockpit, her dark hair escaping from the ponytail she'd tried to tame it with. "Mom, the salvage scanner is picking up something weird in Sector 7. It's not metal, but it's definitely artificial." Rose frowned. Most salvage operations were straightforward. You found the wreckage, you cut out anything valuable, you sold it to whoever asked the fewest questions. Simple, clean, legal mostly. But weird signals usually meant complications, and complications meant trouble. "Define weird," Rose said, pulling up the scanner display. "It's giving off a low-level energy signature, but it's rhythmic, like a heartbeat but really slow." Lily slid into the co-pilot seat, her young face creased with concern. "And Mom, it's getting weaker." Rose studied the readout. Whatever was out there, it was dying. She'd been salvaging long enough to recognize the signs. The energy pattern was fading, growing more irregular with each pulse. In maybe an hour, it would flatline completely. "Could be some kind of emergency beacon," she said, though she didn't really believe it. Emergency beacons didn't have heartbeats. She changed course toward the signal, navigating carefully through the twisted remains of what had once been a sophisticated research station. The facility must have been enormous before whatever destroyed it. Now it was just chunks of metal and ceramic floating in the void, some pieces still glowing with residual heat from the explosion that had torn it apart. The signal led them to what looked like a section of the station's lower levels. The hull was cracked open like an egg, revealing corridors and laboratories that had been exposed to vacuum. Rose maneuvered the Lucky Strike close enough to extend the salvage arms, then suited up for EVA. "I'm coming with you," Lily announced, reaching for her own suit. "Like hell you are. We don't know what's over there." "Mom, I'm not a kid anymore. Besides, you need someone to watch your back." Rose wanted to argue, but Lily had a point. She was 16, old enough to help with the family business, and she'd proven herself capable during their salvage runs. More importantly, Rose couldn't afford to leave her alone on the ship in case something went wrong. In space, alone meant dead. 20 minutes later, they were floating through the ruined corridors of the research station, following Lily's scanner toward the mysterious signal. Emergency lighting flickered sporadically, powered by some backup system that was slowly dying. Their helmet lights cast eerie shadows on the walls as they moved deeper into the facility. "This place gives me the creeps," Lily whispered over the comm. Rose had to agree. There was something unsettling about the station that went beyond the obvious damage. The laboratories they passed were too clean, too sterile. Whatever research had been conducted here, it hadn't been the usual corporate science. This felt military, secretive, dangerous. The signal led them to a heavy door marked with symbols Rose didn't recognize. The door was sealed, but the explosion had cracked the frame enough that they could pry it open with their tools. Beyond was a small chamber that looked more like a prison cell than a laboratory, and inside the cell was the source of the signal. Rose's breath caught in her throat. Floating in the center of the chamber, held in place by some kind of containment field, was a creature she recognized from childhood stories and ancient history vids. A dragon, but not like the massive, terrifying beasts from the legends. This one was small, no bigger than a house cat, and it was clearly dying. The little dragon's scales were gray and dull, lacking the brilliant colors Rose remembered from the old pictures. Metal bands circled its tiny limbs, connected to machines that blinked with cold clinical lights. Tubes and wires fed into its body, and Rose realized with growing horror that this wasn't a containment system. It was life support, "Oh my God," Lily breathed. "Mom, is that really a dragon?" Rose couldn't answer. She was too busy staring at the creature's face. Even unconscious, even dying, there was something in its features that spoke of intelligence, of awareness, of pain that went beyond the physical. According to everything Rose had learned in school, dragons were extinct. Their homeworld had been destroyed centuries ago in something called the Great Purge, when the galactic government had decided that dragons were too dangerous to be allowed to exist. The official story was that dragons had been violent, aggressive creatures that threatened peaceful civilizations. Looking at this tiny, tortured being, Rose found herself doubting that official story. The dragon's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises that shifted between gold and silver like liquid metal. When it saw Rose and Lily, it didn't snarl or try to attack. Instead, it made a sound so heartbreaking that Rose felt tears forming in her eyes despite the recycled air in her suit. It was the sound of a child crying for its mother. "We have to help it," Lily said, already moving toward the containment field. "Wait." Rose grabbed her daughter's arm. "We don't know what those machines are doing. If we shut them down wrong, we might kill it." But even as she spoke, Rose was studying the setup. The machines weren't keeping the dragon alive. They were keeping it weak. The metal bands were some kind of neural suppressors, designed to limit the creature's natural abilities. The tubes were feeding it just enough nutrients to survive, but not enough to thrive. This wasn't life support. This was systematic torture. "Lily, start recording everything. We're going to need evidence." Rose began disconnecting the tubes and wires, working carefully but quickly. With each connection she severed, the dragon seemed to grow a little stronger. When she finally managed to override the containment field, the little creature fell gently into her gloved hands. It was so light she could barely feel its weight. Its breathing was shallow and rapid, like a bird's. But it was alive. And as Rose held it close to her chest, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. "We're taking it home," she announced. "Mom, dragons are supposed to be reported to the authorities. It's the law." Rose looked down at the tiny creature in her arms, then at the torture chamber they'd found it in. "Some laws are made to be broken, kiddo. Besides, look around. Whoever did this to it, they weren't exactly following the law either." They made their way back to the Lucky Strike in silence, Rose cradling the dragon while Lily carried their equipment. As they prepared to leave the ruined station behind, Rose couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. But when she checked the scanners, space around them was empty. 3 hours later, they were in hyperspace, heading for the frontier worlds where questions weren't asked and answers weren't expected. In the ship's small medical bay, the dragon lay unconscious on a bed of blankets Lily had gathered from their quarters. Its breathing was steadier now, and Rose could swear its scales looked a little less gray. "What are we going to call it?" Lily asked, gently stroking the creature's head. Rose smiled for the first time in weeks. "How about hope? Because that's what it is. Hope that there's still good in this galaxy." As if in response, the dragon's eyes opened for just a moment. It looked directly at Rose, and she could have sworn she saw gratitude in those ancient, intelligent eyes. Then it drifted back to sleep, safe for the first time in months. Rose settled into the chair beside the medical bed, her salvage operation forgotten. She had the feeling their lives had just changed forever. She just hoped it was for the better. 3 weeks had passed since they'd pulled the dying dragon from that nightmare of a research station, and Rose barely recognized the creature now curled up in Lily's lap, where once there had been dull gray scales and hollow cheeks. Now brilliant silver-blue armor caught the light streaming through the Lucky Strike's observation windows. The dragon had grown too, now roughly the size of a small dog, though it still preferred to sleep pressed against Lily's side like a trusting pet. "Its name is Spark," Lily announced one morning over breakfast, scratching behind the dragon's delicate ear fins. "It told me in a dream." Rose paused with her coffee cup halfway to her lips. "It told you?" "Not with words exactly. More like feelings and pictures. It's really smart, Mom. Smarter than we thought." Rose studied the dragon more carefully. She'd noticed its intelligence over the past few weeks, the way it watched their daily routines with obvious understanding, how it had learned to operate the food dispenser after seeing Lily use it just once, the careful way it explored the ship, never touching anything that looked important or dangerous. But communication through dreams was something else entirely. "Show me," Rose said. Lily gently lifted Spark and placed the dragon on the table between them. Up close, Rose could see how much the creature had changed. Its eyes were brighter now, swirling with colors that seemed to shift like liquid metal. Its scales had a depth to them that reminded Rose of looking into deep water. Spark looked directly at Rose and tilted its head, studying her with obvious curiosity. Then, without warning, Rose felt something brush against her mind. Not intrusive or forceful, but gentle, like fingers trailing through water. Images flowed through her consciousness. The research station, as it had been before the explosion, filled with scientists in white coats. She saw herself and Lily as Spark remembered them, haloed in warm golden light that spoke of safety and kindness. She felt the dragon's gratitude, deep and pure and overwhelming. Rose jerked back, nearly spilling her coffee. "Holy stars, see?" Lily grinned. "I told you it was smart. It understands everything we say, and it's been learning about humans by watching us. It knows we're family, and it knows we saved its life." Over the following days, Rose watched in amazement as Spark continued to develop. The dragon's telepathic abilities grew stronger, allowing for more complex communication. It could project simple concepts and emotions, though it seemed to prefer sharing feelings rather than specific thoughts. More surprising was Spark's interaction with the ship's systems. Rose first noticed it when their navigation computer, which had been acting up for months, suddenly started working perfectly. Then their environmental systems, which had been running hot, mysteriously corrected themselves overnight. "Lily, have you been messing with the ship's computer?" "No, why?" Rose pulled up the maintenance logs on her tablet. Every system on the Lucky Strike was now running at peak efficiency. Errors that had plagued them for years were simply gone. Because either we've got the luckiest ship in the galaxy, or our passenger has been making some improvements. They found Spark in the engine room, floating in the air near the main computer core. The dragon's eyes were closed in concentration, and lines of light seemed to flow between its scales and the ship's circuits. As they watched, a warning light that had been flashing red for weeks suddenly turned green. "Spark?" Lily called softly. The dragon opened its eyes and drifted down to land on Lily's shoulder, looking pleased with itself. Through their growing mental connection, Rose felt a sense of satisfaction and the concept of gift. The dragon was trying to repay their kindness by making their ship better. "It's fixing everything," Rose said in wonder. "How is that even possible?" The answer came in the form of shared memories. Spark showed them glimpses of its past before the torture and imprisonment. Dragons weren't just intelligent creatures. They were living computers, capable of interfacing directly with any electronic system. They had been the galaxy's first engineers, helping primitive civilizations develop technology and explore the stars. But with greater understanding came greater worry. If dragons were truly as advanced as Spark's memory suggested, why had they been hunted to extinction? The official history claimed they were dangerous, but everything Rose had seen suggested the opposite. Her concerns proved justified when their long-range communications array picked up a priority transmission on military frequencies. "All vessels, be advised." Stolen military asset believed to be aboard civilian salvage ship Lucky Strike. Registration number LX7742. Vessel commanded by Rose Miller, human female, age 43. Also aboard Lily Miller, human female, age 16. Approach with extreme caution. Asset is classified Level X and is considered highly dangerous. Report any sightings immediately. Rose's blood ran cold. Level X was a classification she'd only heard whispered about in spacer bars. It meant something so dangerous that normal protocols didn't apply. It meant shoot first and ask questions later. "They're talking about Spark," Lily said, unconsciously pulling the dragon closer. "They think it's dangerous." Rose looked at the little dragon perched on her daughter's shoulder, gently grooming its scales. The same creature that had carefully avoided breaking anything on their ship. The same creature that fixed their systems instead of sabotaging them. The same creature that radiated warmth and contentment whenever they were near. "We need to get somewhere safe," Rose said. "Somewhere they can't follow us." She changed course for the frontier zones, those wild regions of space where government authority was more suggestion than law. It would take them 3 days to reach the edge of civilized space. 3 days to stay ahead of whoever was hunting them, but they only made it 2. Rose was reviewing star charts in her quarters when the proximity alarm started screaming. She rushed to the cockpit to find Lily already at the scanner station, her face pale with fear. 3 ships just dropped out of hyperspace, Lily reported. Military configuration heavy weapons. They're hailing us. Rose slipped into the pilot's seat and opened the communication channel. A cold professional voice filled the cockpit. Civilian vessel Lucky Strike, this is Commander Harris of the military cruiser Domination. You are harboring stolen government property. Shut down your engines and prepare to be boarded. I don't know what you're talking about, Rose replied, though her hands were already moving to the navigation controls. We're just salvage operators. Our sensors indicate the presence of a Class X biological weapon aboard your vessel. Surrender it immediately and you may avoid prosecution. Biological weapon. Rose felt sick. That's what they called Spark. Not a sentient being, not an intelligent creature, but a weapon. There's nothing like that here, Rose lied. We're coming aboard, Captain Miller. Resistance will be met with appropriate force. The communication channel closed. Rose looked at the tactical display and felt her heart sink. 3 military cruisers against 1 aging cargo hauler. There was no way they could fight and nowhere they could run. That's when Spark appeared in the cockpit, moving with purpose and determination Rose had never seen before. The dragon landed on the main console and looked up at both humans with eyes that suddenly seemed far older than its small body suggested. Through their mental link, Rose felt a surge of emotions from the dragon. Gratitude for their kindness, love for their family, and underneath it all, a deep ancient anger at those who had tortured it and now threatened its new home. Spark's scales began to glow with an inner light. The dragon spread its wings no larger than Rose's hands and let out a sound that was part roar, part song, and entirely alien. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, resonating through the ship's hull and out into space itself. Every screen on the Lucky Strike suddenly displayed the same image. The 3 military cruisers, but now they were dark and lifeless, drifting without power. Rose watched in amazement as the massive warships went completely dead, their engines cutting out, their weapons powering down, their communications going silent. What did you do? Rose whispered. The answer came not in words, but in understanding that flowed directly into her mind. Spark had reached out with its abilities and simply turned off every electronic system on the attacking ships. Not destroyed them, just switched them off like lights at bedtime. The crews were alive and unharmed, but their ships were now as helpless as the Lucky Strike had been moments before. Can you turn them back on? Lily asked. Spark tilted its head, considering. Through their link, Rose felt the dragon's amusement. It could turn the ships back on whenever it wanted. But first, it wanted to make sure its family was safe. Rose didn't hesitate. She fired up the Lucky Strike's engines and jumped to hyperspace, leaving 3 disabled military cruisers floating in empty space. As the stars stretched into lines around them, she realized their lives had just become infinitely more complicated. But looking at Spark, still glowing softly on the console, Rose found she didn't care. Whatever the dragon truly was, whatever power it possessed, it had chosen to trust them. It had chosen to protect them. It had chosen them as family. And Rose Miller had never backed down from protecting her family. She wasn't about to start now. Where are we going? Lily asked. Rose smiled grimly and set course for the furthest edge of the frontier. Somewhere they'll never think to look. Time to disappear for a while. Behind them, the glow of Spark's scales gradually faded, but the warmth of the dragon's presence remained. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The rim world of Haven's Rest wasn't much to look at, but that was exactly what Rose needed. A backwater planet on the edge of civilized space, where the only law was what you could enforce yourself, and the only questions people asked were about the price of fuel and the quality of your credits. The Lucky Strike settled onto the dusty landing pad with a mechanical wheeze that suggested their recent adventures had taken more out of the old ship than Rose liked to admit. "Welcome to the end of the galaxy," Rose muttered, watching through the viewport as local scavengers emerged from the shadows to examine their ship. Population: whoever's too broke, too wanted, or too crazy to live anywhere else. Spark had grown again during their 3-day journey to Haven's Rest, now roughly the size of a medium dog. Though still light enough for Lily to carry comfortably, the dragon's scales had continued to shift and brighten, now displaying a mesmerizing pattern of silver and blue that seemed to move like liquid metal. More importantly, its telepathic abilities had stabilized, allowing for clearer communication with both humans. The dragon had spent much of the journey sharing more of its memories with them, painting a picture of a galaxy very different from the one Rose had learned about in school. Dragons hadn't been the monsters of legend. They had been teachers, explorers, and builders helping young civilizations reach for the stars. The Great Purge hadn't been a necessary war against dangerous beasts. It had been genocide, carried out by those who feared what dragons represented. A universe where cooperation mattered more than control. "Why are you showing us this?" Rose had asked during one particularly vivid memory-sharing session. Spark's response had come as a mixture of concepts and emotions. "Because you need to understand what you're protecting, and because the truth matters more than comfortable lies." Now, as they prepared to disembark onto Haven's Rest, Rose wondered if understanding the truth had been worth the price they were paying. 3 times during their journey, military ships had appeared on their sensors only to veer away when Spark demonstrated its ability to disable their systems from vast distances. Each encounter had left the dragon exhausted, and Rose more worried about what would happen when word of their passengers spread beyond military channels. The local port authority consisted of one bored-looking official who charged them docking fees without asking for identification or cargo manifests. Rose paid in untraceable credits and registered their ship under a false name, though she doubted it would fool anyone seriously looking for them. "How long are we staying?" Lily asked as they made their way through the dusty streets of Haven's Rest's only settlement. "Until we figure out our next move," Rose replied, though privately she wondered if they had any good options left. You couldn't hide from the government forever, especially when you were carrying something they wanted as badly as they seemed to want Spark. They rented a small apartment above a cantina that asked no questions and accepted cash in advance. The accommodations were basic but clean, and more importantly, the building had multiple exits and a clear view of the spaceport. If they needed to run again, they could be back to the Lucky Strike in under 5 minutes. For 2 days their luck held. Rose began to think they might actually be safe on Haven's Rest, at least temporarily. The locals minded their own business. The port authority seemed more interested in drinking than enforcing regulations, and Spark appeared to be enjoying the freedom to explore their small apartment without the constraints of ship life. Then, on their 3rd morning, everything went wrong. Rose woke to the sound of heavy boots on the stairs outside their apartment. Military boots moving with purpose and precision. She was out of bed and reaching for her sidearm before she was fully awake, years of spacer instincts taking over. "Lily," she hissed. "Get Spark and get to the back window, now!" But even as the words left her mouth, Rose knew they were too late. The building was surrounded. Through the thin walls, she could hear voices coordinating their approach, professional and cold. These weren't local security forces or bounty hunters. These were government specialists, and they'd come prepared. "Rose Miller," a familiar voice called from the hallway. "Commander Harris, the same officer who'd tried to board their ship days earlier. We know you're in there. We've verified your ship at the port, and our sensors have confirmed the presence of the stolen asset. This doesn't have to end badly." Rose looked at Lily, who was holding Spark close to her chest. The dragon's scales were beginning to glow with that inner light Rose had learned to associate with its power. But this time something was different. Instead of the warm, protective glow they'd seen before, Spark's light was colder, more focused. Through their telepathic link, Rose felt the dragon's growing anger. "We gave you a chance to cooperate before," Harris continued. "You chose to resist. You disabled 3 military vessels and fled from lawful authority. That makes you terrorists in the eyes of the law. But we're prepared to be reasonable. Surrender the weapon and you can walk away from this." "It's not a weapon," Lily called out, her voice shaking with emotion. "It's a living being with feelings and intelligence. It has a name. The creature is government property, developed at enormous expense over decades of research. Its capabilities make it a strategic asset of the highest importance. We will not allow it to remain in civilian hands." Rose felt Spark's reaction to those words like a physical blow. The dragon's memories flooded through their connection, showing her the reality of that research. Years of imprisonment, torture disguised as science, experiments designed to break its will and turn it into a controllable tool of war. The scientist who had heard it hadn't seen a sentient being. They had seen a thing to be used. The apartment door exploded inward as heavily armored soldiers poured into the room. Rose raised her weapon, knowing it was useless against their military-grade protection, but determined to protect her family anyway. That's when Spark made its choice. The dragon slipped from Lily's arms and landed on the floor between the soldiers and the Miller family. Its small form seemed to expand, not physically but in presence, filling the room with ancient authority. The glow from its scales intensified until it was almost blinding, and when it spoke, its mental voice reached every mind in the building. Stop. The single word carried such power that the soldiers froze in place, their weapons lowering involuntarily. Rose felt the dragon's consciousness expand outward, touching not just the soldiers in their apartment, but every person in the building, then beyond to the military vehicles surrounding the structure, then further still to the ships waiting in orbit. I am not a weapon. I am not property. I am not a thing to be owned or controlled. Through Spark's expanded awareness, Rose suddenly understood the true scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about one escaped research subject. The dragon's very existence threatened everything the government had built their power on. For centuries, they had maintained control by keeping species divided, suspicious of each other, competing for limited resources. Dragons represented something different: cooperation, shared knowledge, unity across species lines. I am the last child of Drake and Prime, keeper of the old ways, guardian of the bonds between all thinking beings. I choose who I stand with. I choose who I protect. I choose my own family. The dragon's mental voice grew stronger, and Rose realized with amazement that Spark wasn't just communicating with the people in their immediate vicinity. Its telepathic call was reaching across space, touching minds on distant worlds, awakening something that had been sleeping in the collective consciousness of the galaxy. Commander Harris stepped forward, his face grim with determination. The creature's abilities are precisely why it must be controlled. It's too dangerous to be allowed free rein. Spark turned its glowing eyes toward the commander, and Rose saw Harris flinch as the dragon's full attention focused on him. Dangerous to whom? To those who profit from division and fear. To those who would cage intelligence and call it science. To those who see cooperation as a threat to their power. The dragon's scales blazed brighter, and suddenly every electronic device in the building shut down. Not just the soldiers' weapons and communication equipment, but everything. The lights, the air recyclers, the building's computer systems, even the simple electronic locks on the doors. But this time Spark didn't stop with the immediate area. Rose felt the dragon's power reaching out across Haven's Rest, shutting down the military vehicles, the ships in orbit, and every piece of government-controlled technology on the planet. In seconds, the most advanced military force in the galaxy had been reduced to people standing in the dark with useless equipment. You came here with weapons and threats demanding surrender of a free being to masters who tortured it for their own gain. You speak of law while breaking every principle that law should protect. You call me dangerous while demonstrating your own willingness to use violence against those who have harmed no one. Through the sudden silence, Rose heard something she hadn't expected. Applause. It started slow, just one person clapping somewhere in the building below them. Then another joined in and another, until the entire settlement of Haven's Rest was cheering. The locals don't seem to agree with your assessment, Rose said to Commander Harris, who was staring at his dead equipment with the expression of a man watching his career end in real time. Spark moved to stand beside Lily, its glow gradually fading to a warm, comfortable light. Through their mental link, Rose felt the dragon's exhaustion. Using its abilities on such a scale had taken enormous effort. I will not be taken. I will not be caged. I will not be turned into a tool for those who see freedom as a problem to be solved. I have chosen my family, and I will protect them as they protected me. Commander Harris looked around the room at his soldiers, at their useless weapons, at the dragon that had just demonstrated it could shut down an entire military operation with a thought. This isn't over, he said finally. No, Spark agreed. It is just beginning. The galaxy is remembering what it chose to forget, and that memory will spread, one mind at a time, one world at a time, until no being will again suffer alone in darkness, while others pretend not to see. Through the apartment windows, Rose could see crowds gathering in the streets of Haven's Rest. The dragon's telepathic call had awakened something in the local population, a sense of wonder and possibility that had been dormant for too long. People were looking up at their apartment not with fear but with hope. We need to leave, Rose said quietly. This place isn't safe anymore. Lily nodded, scooping Spark into her arms. The dragon settled against her with obvious contentment, its mental voice warm with affection. Wherever we go together. That is what family means. As they made their way out of the apartment building, Past the deactivated soldiers and through the cheering crowds, Rose realized that running was no longer enough. Spark's demonstration of power had changed everything. Word would spread across the galaxy within hours. The last dragon was not only alive but free, and it had chosen to stand with humanity. The real adventure was just beginning. New Terra stretched out beneath the Lucky Strike like a patchwork quilt of green farmland and blue rivers, with small towns scattered across the landscape like seeds dropped by a careless farmer. Rose had chosen this world carefully after their escape from Haven's Rest. It was far from the major trade routes, populated mostly by families who had come here seeking simple lives away from the complexity of the inner systems. More importantly, it was the kind of place where neighbors helped each other without asking too many questions about the past. The Miller farm sat on a gentle hill overlooking a valley filled with wheat, fields that swayed in the afternoon breeze. Rose had bought the property with the last of their savings, a modest house with a red barn and enough land to give them room to breathe. For the first time in months, she felt like they might actually be safe. Spark had grown again during their journey to New Terra, now the size of a large dog with scales that seemed to contain entire galaxies of swirling light. The dragon had taken to the farm immediately, spending hours exploring the fields and woods, occasionally floating above the treetops with obvious joy. Its telepathic abilities had grown stronger too, allowing for complex conversations that felt as natural as speaking aloud. "I like it here," Spark said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The dragon's mental voice had developed its own personality over the weeks, warm and curious with touches of ancient wisdom that reminded Rose how old the creature's species truly was. "Good," Rose replied, scratching behind the dragon's neck ridges. "Because this is home now. No more running, no more hiding. We make our stand here." She meant it too. They had traveled across half the galaxy, always looking over their shoulders, always ready to run at the first sign of trouble. But running hadn't solved anything. If anything, their escape from Haven's Rest had made things worse. Word of the dragon's demonstration had spread across the civilized worlds within days, turning their story into legend. Some called Spark a miracle, proof that the ancient stories were true, and that dragons had returned to guide the galaxy into a new age. Others called it a weapon of unimaginable power that threatened the stability of civilization itself. Religious groups declared it everything from a messenger of their gods to a herald of the end times. Scientists wanted to study it, politicians wanted to control it, and military leaders wanted to either capture it or destroy it before someone else could. Through it all, Spark remained remarkably calm about the attention. "Let them talk," the dragon had said when Rose showed it some of the news reports. Words cannot cage what chooses to be free. But Rose worried about what would come after the words. Sooner or later, someone would decide that talking wasn't enough. That someone turned out to be the Galactic Council itself. The official delegation arrived on a Tuesday morning. 3 sleek government ships that landed in the field beside their house without asking permission. Rose watched from the kitchen window as men and women in expensive suits emerged from the ships, flanked by security personnel whose weapons were visible but not quite threatening. "Company," she called to Lily, who was in the barn with Spark. The delegation's leader was a woman Rose recognized from the news broadcasts, Counselor Williams from the Core Worlds. She was younger than Rose had expected, with the kind of polished appearance that came from a lifetime in politics. When she smiled, it didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Miller," Counselor Williams said as Rose stepped onto the porch. "Thank you for agreeing to see us." "I don't remember agreeing to anything," Rose replied. "But you're here, so talk." "We're here about the dragon, of course. The Council has voted to classify it as a cultural heritage artifact of galactic significance. We're prepared to offer you substantial compensation for its transfer to a proper research facility, where it can be studied and protected." Rose felt Spark's presence in her mind, calm but alert. The dragon was listening from the barn, its telepathic senses easily reaching across the distance. "It's not for sale," Rose said simply. "Mrs. Miller, please understand the position you're in. This creature is the last of its kind, a living link to our galaxy's ancient past. It belongs in a place where scientists can learn from it, where its knowledge can benefit all sentient species. It belongs where it chooses to be. And it chooses to be with us." Counselor Williams's smile became strained. "The creature's preferences are irrelevant. It lacks legal standing as a sentient being under galactic law, It's an animal, Mrs. Miller, albeit a very intelligent one. That's when Spark made its entrance. The dragon emerged from the barn, moving with fluid grace, its scales catching the morning sunlight like liquid starfire. It had grown again, Rose realized, now easily the size of a small horse, though still possessing the elegant proportions of its kind. But it wasn't Spark's size that made the delegation step backward. It was the intelligence blazing in its eyes, ancient and profound and utterly alien. Spark settled onto the porch beside Rose, its mental voice reaching every mind present with perfect clarity. Greetings, Counselor Williams. I am Spark of Draken Prime, last child of the star-touched, keeper of the old bonds between thinking beings. You speak of me as though I am not here to speak for myself. Counselor Williams stared at the dragon with the expression of someone watching their carefully planned speech crumble into dust. You're actually intelligent. More intelligent than those who would cage wisdom and call it preservation. More intelligent than those who see cooperation as a threat to their power. More intelligent than those who have forgotten that true strength comes from unity, not domination. The dragon's scales began to glow softly, and suddenly every person in the delegation could feel something they had never experienced before. Through Spark's telepathic touch, they saw themselves as the dragon saw them, small, frightened beings clinging to systems of control because they had forgotten how to trust. Your laws declare me property, because your laws were written by those who fear what I represent. Spark continued. But laws written in ignorance have no power over truth. I am not property. I am not an artifact. I am a free being who has chosen my own family and my own home. Counselor Williams recovered her composure with visible effort. Even if we accept your unpersonhood, the fact remains that you possess abilities that could destabilize the entire galactic order. Your demonstration at Haven's Rest disabled an entire military fleet. What happens when other groups decide to use you as a weapon? What happens when governments decide to use fear as a tool of control? Spark replied. What happens when those in power prefer division over cooperation, suspicion over trust, cages over freedom? I have seen where such choices lead, Counselor. I have lived in the laboratories built by those who believed might makes right. The dragon stood and stepped closer to the delegation, its presence filling the farmyard with ancient authority. You want to protect me? Then protect the choice I have made. You want to learn from me? Then learn this. Every being deserves the right to choose their own path, to build their own family, to find their own home. Your laws that deny this truth are the real threat to galactic stability. Rose watched as several members of the delegation exchanged nervous glances. Whatever they had expected to find on New Terra, it wasn't this. They had come prepared to negotiate for the transfer of a valuable but ultimately passive resource. Instead, they had found themselves in a philosophical debate with a being whose intelligence and moral authority made their positions look petty and small. The Council will not simply abandon its responsibility, Counselor Williams said finally. If you refuse to cooperate voluntarily, other measures may become necessary. Spark's eyes blazed with inner fire. Other measures? You mean force? Violence? The threat of harm against those who have shown me nothing but kindness? The dragon's mental voice carried an edge of anger that made everyone present step backward. Try it, Counselor. Send your fleets and your soldiers, send your weapons and your threats, and learn what the universe truly thinks of those who would cage freedom itself. As if in response to the dragon's words, Rose's communication console began chiming with incoming messages, dozens of them, then hundreds, then thousands. Messages from across the galaxy, all saying essentially the same thing. Leave the dragon alone. The news of the Council's visit had somehow spread across the galactic network within hours of the delegation's arrival. Now responses were pouring in from every civilized world, scientists demanding that Spark be allowed to remain free, religious leaders declaring the dragon's right to choose its own path, ordinary citizens expressing support for the Miller family and their unusual houseguest. More importantly, other species were responding too. The usually reclusive Altarians had issued a statement supporting Spark's autonomy. The Mechanicus Collective had declared their intention to defend the dragon's right to self-determination. Even the mysterious Thought Weavers had emerged from their hidden enclaves to condemn any attempt to force Spark into captivity. It seems the galaxy has made its opinion clear, Rose said, gesturing toward the still chiming console. Spark stays here with us. End of discussion. Counselor Williams looked at the flood of messages. at her nervous delegation and at the dragon whose very presence had somehow united dozens of species in common cause. "This isn't over," she said finally, echoing the words Commander Harris had used weeks before. "No," Spark agreed, its mental voice now touched with something that might have been amusement. "It is not over. It has only just begun. The galaxy is remembering what it means to choose cooperation over control, unity over division, love over fear, and that memory will spread, one world at a time, one heart at a time, until no being stands alone in darkness." As the delegation retreated to their ships, Rose felt a deep sense of satisfaction. They had won this battle, but more importantly, they had started something larger. The dragon's simple choice to build a family had become a symbol of freedom that was inspiring beings across the galaxy to question the systems that kept them divided and afraid. "What happens now?" Lily asked, emerging from the house where she had been watching from the windows. Spark settled onto the porch, its scales gradually returning to their normal, gentle glow. "Now we live," the dragon said simply. "We tend our farm, we care for each other, and we show the galaxy what it means to be a family chosen by love rather than bound by law or blood." Rose looked out over their valley, at the wheat fields swaying in the breeze and the small town visible in the distance. For the first time since they had found Spark in that torture chamber, she felt truly hopeful about the future. They had made their stand, claimed their ground, and declared their independence from those who would control them. Now it was time to build the life they had chosen together. 6 months had passed since the Council delegation's failed visit to New Terra, and the galaxy had not been quiet. What started as scattered messages of support had grown into something Rose had never expected: a movement. Ships arrived at their farm almost daily now, bringing visitors from worlds she had never heard of. Some came seeking wisdom from Spark, others came offering help and protection, and a few came simply because they wanted to see the dragon that had sparked a revolution, with nothing more than a choice to be free. Rose stood in her kitchen, preparing dinner for their latest group of visitors, when she heard the sound that had become familiar over the past months, Spark's deep, musical rumble of laughter echoing from the barn. The dragon had discovered that it enjoyed teaching, and their barn had been converted into an informal classroom where beings from across the galaxy came to learn what dragons had always known about cooperation and unity. "The Zephyrians arrived this morning," Lily announced, coming in from the fields with dirt on her boots and a smile on her face. At 17, she had grown comfortable with their strange new life, serving as translator and guide for visitors who struggled with Spark's telepathic communication. They brought some kind of crystalline computer that they say can interface with Spark's consciousness. They want to create a permanent record of dragon knowledge. Rose nodded, though she still felt overwhelmed by the scope of what their simple farm had become. What had started as a family of 3 had grown into a community of dozens, with visitors camping in their fields and neighbors volunteering to help with the constant stream of guests. The local town had tripled in size as people relocated to New Terra just to be near Spark. But it wasn't just their planet that was changing. Reports came daily of transformations happening across the galaxy. On the industrial world of Forge Prime, workers had organized the first cross-species union in galactic history, inspired by Spark's teachings about cooperation. The research stations of the Outer Rim had begun sharing their findings freely, instead of hoarding discoveries behind corporate barriers. Even the military academies were revising their curricula to include courses on interspecies diplomacy and peaceful conflict resolution. The most dramatic changes were happening in the field of archaeology. Ancient sites that had been dismissed as primitive were being re-examined with new understanding. Ruins on dozens of worlds were revealing technologies and knowledge that had been hidden in plain sight for centuries, waiting for minds prepared to see cooperation instead of conquest in the archaeological record. "Mom," Lily said, her voice carrying an unusual note of excitement, "you need to see the latest transmission from the core worlds. Something big is happening." They made their way to the communication center they had set up in what used to be Rose's home office. The room was now filled with equipment donated by admirers from across the galaxy, creating a communication network that rivaled anything the government possessed. The main screen was displaying a live feed from the Galactic Council chambers, where an emergency session was in progress. But this wasn't the usual formal proceeding Rose remembered from civics classes. The chamber was packed with representatives from species that had never before participated in galactic governance. More surprising, they were all speaking with one voice. "The time has come for fundamental change," declared Ambassador Chen, a human Rose recognized from the news, but who was speaking with an authority she had never possessed before. "For too long, our government has been built on the principle that different species cannot be trusted to cooperate. That fear and division are natural states that must be managed through control and regulation. Recent events have proven these assumptions false." The camera panned across the chamber, showing beings from dozens of different worlds standing together in unprecedented unity. Rose saw Altarians with their crystal-enhanced minds, Mechanicus representatives with their biomechanical interfaces, even the mysterious thought-weavers whose species rarely spoke to outsiders. "The dragon known as Spark has demonstrated what our ancestors knew, but we chose to forget," continued a tall, ethereal being Rose didn't recognize. "That cooperation is not weakness but strength. That unity is not uniformity but harmony. That diversity is not a problem to be solved but a gift to be celebrated." Rose felt Spark's presence before she saw the dragon, its consciousness touching her mind with gentle warmth. The dragon had grown again, now easily the size of a small building, though it moved with the same fluid grace it had possessed as a tiny creature in that research station. Its scales had deepened in color and complexity, now displaying patterns that seemed to shift and flow like liquid light. "They are remembering," Spark said, settling beside Rose to watch the unprecedented session. "What I shared with them was not new knowledge but old wisdom, buried under centuries of fear and forgotten by choice rather than necessity." On the screen, the debates continued, but these weren't the usual political arguments Rose remembered from her school days. Instead, representatives were sharing discoveries and insights, building on each other's ideas rather than tearing them down. The Zephyrians presented crystalline storage devices that could preserve knowledge for millions of years. The Forge Worlds offered manufacturing techniques that could provide abundance for all. The research stations shared breakthrough discoveries that could revolutionize everything from medicine to space travel. "It's like watching the galaxy wake up," Lily said in wonder. "That is exactly what is happening," Spark agreed. "For centuries, species have been taught to hoard their knowledge, to guard their discoveries, to see other beings as competitors for limited resources. But resources are only limited when cooperation is impossible. When beings work together, when knowledge is shared freely, when differences are seen as strengths rather than threats, abundance becomes natural." The dragon's scales pulsed with gentle light, and suddenly Rose found herself seeing the galactic transformation through Spark's expanded awareness. Across thousands of worlds, beings were making connections they had never imagined possible. Scientists were sharing research that solved problems in hours that had puzzled them for years. Artists were creating works that transcended species barriers and spoke to universal experiences. Even children were learning to see diversity as normal and cooperation as natural. "Look," Spark said, directing their attention back to the screen. Councillor Williams was standing at the central podium, but she looked different from the polished politician who had visited their farm months before. Her expression was softer, more genuine, touched with something that looked almost like hope. "I came to New Terra 6 months ago believing that the dragon was a threat to galactic stability," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the chamber. "I was wrong. The threat to stability comes from systems built on fear, division, and the belief that different means dangerous. The dragon didn't destabilize our galaxy. It reminded us of who we could be if we chose courage over fear, cooperation over control, love over law." The chamber erupted in applause that seemed to go on forever. But more importantly, Rose could feel something shifting in the collective consciousness of the galaxy. Through Spark's telepathic connection, she sensed minds opening, barriers falling, and possibilities blooming like flowers after a long winter. "What happens now?" Rose asked. "Now the real work begins," Spark replied. "Remembering is only the first step. Building a galaxy based on cooperation instead of control will take generations, but the foundation has been laid, and it will not crumble." The dragon turned its ancient eyes toward Rose and Lily, its mental voice warm with affection. "And it began here in this kitchen, with a family that chose to love a creature they had every reason to fear. With humans who saw suffering and chose compassion, who met violence with gentleness, who answered hatred with hope." Rose felt tears running down her cheeks. Though she wasn't sure if they were tears of joy or overwhelming gratitude, their simple act of kindness had somehow changed the course of galactic history. "The transmission is shifting," Lily announced, adjusting the controls. "There's a message coming in directly for us." The screen flickered and then displayed the face of Admiral Peterson, the highest-ranking military officer in the galactic government. But like Counselor Williams, he looked different from his official portraits. Older, wearier, but somehow more human. "Mrs. Miller," he said, looking directly into the camera, "I want to apologize on behalf of the military forces that pursued you and threatened your family. We were wrong, not just tactically or strategically, but morally. We forgot that our duty is to protect all sentient beings, not to serve the fears of those in power." The Admiral paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "The military academies will be restructured around principles of cooperation and protection, rather than dominance and control. Our fleets will be reorganized as exploration and rescue services, rather than instruments of conquest. And any officer who threatens peaceful beings will be removed from service immediately." He smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. The dragon was right. True strength comes from unity, not division. True security comes from justice, not force. We're going to build a military worthy of the galaxy we're becoming, not the galaxy we're leaving behind. The transmission ended, leaving them in thoughtful silence. Outside, Rose could hear the sounds of their extended community. Conversations in dozens of languages, children from different species playing together, and the gentle hum of technologies working in harmony. "I never imagined," Rose said softly, "that saving one small creature could change everything." "Every revolution begins with a single choice," Spark replied. "Your choice was not to save the galaxy. It was to save one being from suffering. Everything else followed from that moment of compassion." The dragon stretched its magnificent wings, catching the last light of the setting sun. "And this is only the beginning. The galaxy is vast, and there are still beings who suffer alone in darkness, still systems built on fear and division, still hearts that have forgotten how to hope. But now there are also those who remember what connection feels like, what cooperation can accomplish, what love can overcome." Rose looked out at their valley, now filled with the camps and temporary structures of beings from across the galaxy, all drawn by the simple truth that cooperation was possible and that family could be chosen rather than imposed. "What do you want us to do now?" she asked. "Keep doing what you have always done," Spark said with that deep rumble of amusement. "Love your family, welcome strangers, show kindness to those who need it. The galaxy will take care of itself, one heart at a time, one choice at a time, one family at a time." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Rose realized that their greatest adventures were still ahead of them. They had helped change a galaxy, but more importantly, they had learned what it meant to be part of something larger than themselves. The revolution of love had only just begun. 2 years had transformed the Miller farm into something that had no name in any galactic language. It wasn't quite a settlement, wasn't exactly a school, and definitely wasn't a government installation. The closest anyone had come to describing it was the place where the future begins, though even that didn't capture the sense of quiet, magic that permeated the rolling hills of New. Tara Rose sat on the expanded porch of their house, watching the morning routine that had become as natural as sunrise. In the fields below, children from a dozen different species played games that would have been impossible just a few years ago, their laughter mixing languages and creating new ones. Near the old barn, now converted into a massive library and workshop, beings from across the galaxy collaborated on projects that were reshaping everything from agriculture to space travel. And at the center of it all was Spark, now grown to the size of their original farmhouse, but somehow still the same gentle creature they had rescued from that nightmarish research station. The dragon moved among their guests with infinite patience, teaching, learning, and facilitating connections that seemed impossible until they happened. "The morning briefing is ready," Lily announced, emerging from the communication center with a stack of data tablets. At 19, she had become the unofficial coordinator of what people were calling the New Terra Initiative, managing requests for visits, coordinating research projects, and serving as translator between Spark and the hundreds of beings who came seeking guidance. Rose accepted her tablet and began scrolling through the day's updates. The news was consistently remarkable, though she had learned to take galactic transformation in stride. The frontier wars had ended not through military victory but through economic cooperation. As planets that had fought over resources for generations discovered they could create abundance through collaboration. The slave markets of the Outer Rim had collapsed when workers began organizing across species lines, demanding rights and receiving them through solidarity rather than violence. Most importantly, children across the galaxy were growing up in a universe that saw diversity as strength and cooperation as natural. The generation being born now would never know a galaxy divided by fear and suspicion. "What's our priority today?" Rose asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "The delegation from the core worlds wants to formally establish the new Terra Accords," Lily replied. "They're ready to replace the old Galactic Council structure with something based on Spark's teachings about cooperative governance." Rose nodded, though part of her still marveled at the transformation. The same government that had once hunted them across the galaxy now came to them seeking guidance on how to build a more just society. The same military that had tried to capture Spark now served as a peaceful exploration and rescue service, with their ships bearing the dragon symbol as a reminder of their commitment to protection rather than conquest. "And the research update?" Rose asked. "The archaeological teams have confirmed it," Lily said, her voice filled with excitement that hadn't dimmed despite months of incredible discoveries. "There are dragon ruins on over 200 worlds, all containing knowledge that's been waiting for someone who could understand it. Technologies for clean energy, methods for healing that work across species lines, star charts showing paths between galaxies that we never imagined existed." Rose looked toward the workshop where Spark was working with a team of scientists and engineers, the dragon's consciousness interfacing directly with quantum computers to unlock secrets that had been hidden for millennia. But it wasn't the technology that amazed Rose most. It was the way beings from different worlds worked together as naturally as breathing, their differences creating solutions that none of them could have achieved alone. "There's something else," Lily said, her voice carrying a note of anticipation. "The deep space monitors have detected something at the edge of the galaxy. Ships, but not like anything in our databases. They're not responding to communication attempts, but they're moving toward inhabited space." Rose felt a chill of old fears. "Military vessels?" "We don't think so. Their movement pattern suggests exploration rather than invasion. And Mom, there's something about their energy signatures that Spark wants to investigate personally." Before Rose could respond, she felt the familiar touch of Spark's consciousness, warm and reassuring but touched with something she had never sensed before. Excitement mixed with an emotion that felt almost like hope. "Come," the dragon's mental voice carried clearly across the distance. "There is something I must show you, something I have waited to share until the galaxy was ready to understand." Rose and Lily made their way to the workshop, where they found Spark surrounded by holographic displays, showing the mysterious ships at the galaxy's edge. The dragon's scales were glowing with inner light, patterns shifting and flowing in ways Rose had never seen before. "What are we looking at?" Rose asked. "Possibility," Spark replied, its mental voice resonating with deep emotion. "I told you I was the last dragon and I believed it to be true. But I was not the last dragon in this galaxy. I was the last dragon in this galaxy who chose to stay." The holographic display shifted, showing the unknown ships in greater detail. They were beautiful vessels, organic curves that seemed to flow rather than cut through space, their hulls displaying the same patterns of shifting light that marked Spark's scales. "When the Great Purge began," Spark continued, "some dragons chose to fight and were destroyed. Others chose to hide and were eventually found. But a few chose a different path. They left this galaxy entirely, seeking places where they could preserve dragon knowledge and dragon ways until the time was right to return." Rose stared at the display, understanding slowly dawning. "Those are dragon ships carrying dragon families," Spark confirmed. "They have been watching from the void between galaxies, waiting for a sign that this galaxy had remembered what it means to choose cooperation over conquest. Your kindness to me was that sign. The transformation that followed was the proof they needed." The dragon's consciousness expanded, touching every mind in the workshop and beyond, sharing its vision of what was coming. Ships full of dragons returning to a galaxy that had finally learned to see them, not as threats to be destroyed but as teachers to be welcomed. Ancient knowledge preserved across millions of years of exile, waiting to be shared with species that were ready to receive it. Technologies and philosophies that could transform not just worlds but entire dimensions of existence. How many? Lily asked, though her voice was barely a whisper. Enough to ensure that no dragon will ever again face extinction, Spark replied. Enough to help this galaxy take its next step toward becoming what it was always meant to be. And enough to begin preparing for the greater journey that lies ahead. Greater journey? Spark's mental laughter was warm with infinite possibility. Did you think this galaxy was the only one struggling with the choice between cooperation and conquest? The dragons who left explored the void between galaxies and found wonders beyond imagining, but they also found other galaxies, other species, other civilizations facing the same challenges we have overcome here. The dragon's scales pulsed with light that seemed to contain entire star systems. The transformation that began with your choice to save one small creature is only the first movement in a symphony that spans multiple universes. This galaxy's rediscovery of cooperation and unity is preparation for something far greater, contact with beings from other realities, other dimensions of existence where the same truths apply but in ways we can barely imagine. Rose felt her mind stretching to accommodate concepts that seemed too vast for human understanding. But Spark's presence made it feel not overwhelming but exhilarating, like standing at the edge of an ocean and finally understanding that the horizon was not a barrier, but an invitation. The returning dragons bring more than knowledge and technology, Spark continued. They bring invitation, to join a community that spans not just galaxies but dimensions, to become part of a civilization that sees the universe itself as one vast family, connected by bonds of love and understanding that transcend the limitations of matter and energy. Through the workshop windows, Rose could see beings from dozens of worlds working together on projects that would have been impossible just years before. Children playing games that created new forms of art, scientists sharing discoveries that solved problems across species lines, families forming bonds that had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with choice. This is how it begins, she said, finally understanding the true scope of what they had started. This is how it always begins, Spark agreed. One act of kindness. One choice to love rather than fear. One family that forms around bonds of caring rather than bonds of blood or law. You saved one small dragon, and that dragon saved this galaxy. This galaxy will help save the universe, one connection at a time, one heart at a time, one family at a time. The dragon's eyes, ancient beyond measure but somehow still young with wonder, looked directly at Rose and Lily. And it will all be possible because a human salvage operator and her daughter saw a tortured creature and chose compassion over profit, hope over fear, love over indifference. Rose felt tears on her cheeks as she realized the true magnitude of what lay ahead. Their little farm would become a bridge between galaxies. Their family would grow to include beings from dimensions they couldn't yet imagine, and their simple choice to help a creature in need would ripple outward through realities beyond counting. What happens now? She asked, though she was beginning to understand that the question itself had become something entirely different. Now we prepare for the most beautiful homecoming in the history of the universe, Spark replied. We get ready to welcome family we thought we had lost forever. We open our hearts to wonders we never dared to imagine, and we continue doing what we have always done, showing the universe that love is stronger than fear, that cooperation is more powerful than conquest, and that family is not about where you come from, but about who you choose to stand with when the impossible becomes inevitable. Above them, the first of the dragon ships entered the galaxy's edge, carrying with them the promise of transformations that would make the past 2 years seem like only the beginning of the story. And on a small farm on New Terra, the most important family in the universe prepared to welcome home loved ones who had been lost for far too long. The last dragon had become the first dragon of a new age, and the galaxy would never be the same. The revolution of love was complete. The evolution of connection was about to begin. And somewhere in the kitchen of a modest farmhouse, Rose Miller started making dinner for a family that was about to grow beyond the boundaries of reality itself. One heart at a time, one choice at a time, one impossible moment of wonder at a time.